But when the Fed and the Treasury are actually listing hundreds of banks that are insolvent, I mean, that's sending a message. The banking system is in very bad shape now. It's very dangerous. You've seen what's happening in China. The two biggest land development companies there have collapsed, gone into bankruptcy. One of them is being wound up, and Hong Kong is trying to wind up the other one at the same time. That's going to cause a knock-on effect. Now, let's talk about the assets of a bank. When you see a bank has $10 billion in assets, what does that mean? What are the assets? Where do they come from?
They come from people like me that have a mortgage or
Yeah, absolutely correct. That's part of it. But what else?
they come from big commercial companies, if you would, that have commercial real estate. They come from,
That's part of it, but here's the key. They are required in most countries to invest a certain amount of money in government bonds in the theory that the government bonds are safe. So banks invest in mortgages. We know that. Banks invest in government bonds. We know that. And banks invest in the bonds of other banks because they're safe. In 2022, the highest rated gilts in the UK dropped 53% in 1 year. It was the biggest and fastest drop in English history going back 150 years. Now, something dropping 53% in a year is not what would qualify as safe. So actually, the assets of banks are very precarious. The opportunity for a cascading default is very possible. I thought it would have happened 6 months ago. I think the underpinnings of the economic market, the stock market, is a lot weaker. I've never seen some of these things that are going on, and I'm 77. Okay, I've been through major crashes, so I think we're at a dangerous time, and money in banks is particularly precarious right now.
yeah, it certainly sounds like it. It feels like it. Let's scheme that what you just set out a little bit. So that's how, or I guess you should say that's why it was such a problem when the short-term bond yields were rising, is because that a bank was actually losing money because these assets that they own, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm asking, the assets that they own were depreciating in value, correct?
Exactly right. If they loan money out to you for a real estate mortgage or a commercial real estate mortgage at 3%, and now they've got to pay 3 or 4% for that money, they're losing money every time you pay your mortgage. So the banks are in a no-lose situation. I'm just absolutely shocked. I think the number of PhDs at the Fed, the number that I've seen is the Fed employs 30,000 PhDs. Now, you would think that in 30,000 PhDs, there would be one guy who could do the math and say, it's really wonderful that these bonds are going up in value as interest rates go down. What's going to happen when interest rates go up? And of course, what happens is these guys get creamed. Taking interest rates below zero or to zero is absolute insanity. It was insanity when they did it, and it guaranteed we would have crises, and the crisis is here.
Okay, so the crisis is here, and then what exactly does that look like, I guess, when it's hitting? I mean, banking, and I'm thinking this is a stream of consciousness. is, okay, you're going to see some smaller banks start to go under here pretty shortly again.
Well, not necessarily smaller banks. It could be larger banks too.
I-
Okay. We know that there's 150 or 200 smaller banks are on a watch list and they're in dangerous situation. Let me give you an idea of how bad it is.
Please.
It was a Canadian real estate company, and they were getting demands from their investors for money. So they had to sell a building in New York. Now, when they put it on the market, they put it on the market for $100 million. Take a wild stab as to what it sold for.
90 million to 80 million?
$1.
It's worthless.
Okay, we literally are in Never Never Land, and strange enough, you ask a good question that there's no answer to, and the question being, how is this gonna play out? What it's gonna look like? Uh, have you ever seen one of those giant flocks of birds flying around?
Yeah, absolutely. Every fall and every spring.
Okay, now my wife was British. She knows what the term is. I think it's murmurants. Okay, a murmurants of birds is this giant flock of birds. So you're out for a walk, and it's a beautiful fall day, and the leaves are turning color, and they're just gorgeous. And you look up, and there's this flock of birds, this murmurants. Okay, and one of them shits on you. Now, here's the question that you ask that is impossible to answer. Which bird shit on you?
It doesn't matter really because
Actually, it doesn't matter. Exactly right. So you know you've been to shit on, you're just not real sure which bird to shoot.
I'm still mad. Right. Well, okay, so let's game this out even more then. So we start getting bank failures and bank runs, if you would. And so the Fed starts printing money by any any mechanism, any number of ways that they can. Let's say they start buying the short-term bonds as they did in, I want to say 2008, if my memory serves me correctly, which I'm glad you brought up because I remember you and going to 321 gold in 2008. And I remember I was in the market and thinking this was the end of the world. That being said, let's say the Fed does this again, quantitative easing or whatever mechanisms that they have. Then what?
Okay, that was predicted in a book called The Fourth Turning. And the fourth turning predicted there are 4 different phases. We're in the fourth turning now. And each phase, it's about 20 to 22 years, one generation. And this started somewhere between 2005 and 2008. And there would be a move by those in power to totalitarian government. And we absolutely are seeing that. And the number of people preaching censorship. There are some things that I'm not smart enough to understand. I don't know how you could justify censorship, but there's lots and lots of people saying, we need to censor people if we disagree with it. I'm just, really?
Yeah.
Isn't that like being a slave?
Yeah.
The same thing is true of the immigration issue. I've never heard anyone actually try to justify 10 or 15 million illegal immigrants. Okay. It seems to me like that's total insanity. I hear the mayor of New York City say, well, what we should really do is we should give each of those illegal immigrants that have made it their way to New York City, we should give them $10,000. And of course, that makes me want to go to Mexico. Don't blame